Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Cyber Vigilance podcast. So today we're going to be diving into XDR and all the acronyms that come with it. So we are joined today by our very own James Kavanagh, the CTO here at Cyber Vigilance. If you could give us just a quick introduction to yourself.
Yeah, of course. Hi, my name's James Kavanagh. I am the CTO here at Cyber Vigilance, one of the co-founders. And part of my role is to ensure that any Sentinel-1 demos and proof of concepts go as smoothly as possible and the customer gets the most out of it during that process.
Yeah, great. And I think one of the reasons I wanted you to join, James, is obviously because you're very hands-on with Sentinel-1, so experienced with all the aspects of XDR that it's promoting out there and how customers can utilize that. So obviously you'll be able to give us some first-hand experiences, which is always good.
Sure.
Great. So, XDR, I suppose we kind of have to look at the history of where it's come from to be able to understand what XDR actually is, because there's quite a few different definitions of it out there. A lot of people have their separate takes on it. So, looking back, obviously, it's come from the endpoint space. So, started with next-gen AV, endpoint protection, EDR, now XDR. So, all the acronyms.
Loads of accidents, too many in some cases.
Yep. There's going to be plenty
Yes.
in this podcast, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. No, that's fine. Exactly that. So obviously it started with sort of basic, as you said, endpoint protection, which moved into the next-gen AV, and then extended protection. So XDR came around as sort of extended detection and response, and it tried to, or I suppose it introduces a lot more sort of automation around other technologies. So integrating with other vendors to allow a single pane of glass. I do not like that term, but that's what it's known as. And another acronym. But it allows the ingestion of logs from other key areas in your infrastructure. Mainly things like firewall logs. You can integrate with various technologies. There's a lot of vendors that Sentinel-1 integrate with. They're available via their marketplace integration. And this allows you to take actions when a threat comes into your environment. And we can obviously cover that as we go through this.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it's important to note as well the different types of XDR, because whilst I was doing my research, obviously it became clear that there's open XDR, which is essentially you can feed in the logs and information from other tools, and then there's the native XDR where a vendor is trying to cover every single part of that XDR area. So looking at the firewalls, identity, all of that, they're looking to cover all of it with their own solutions. So it all depends on where you want to place your trust, whether it's all in one vendor or you want to make the most of maybe your other investments that you've made out there. So
well, exactly, that's the thing. If you've invested in Sentinel-1 and it introduces this integration, and it also introduces actions that you can take, and as I said before, you can just automate those, and it correlates that information. So it's other entry points in your environment. So again, firewalls as a prime example, they are obviously quite they're generally on the edge of your network, edge of your infrastructure. So they have a connection to the internet as such, whereas obviously then it traverses into a local LAN. So that's a massive entry point. And because you can't install Sentinel-1 on a firewall, what you can do is you can then take the logs and ingest them, and you can use parsers to put it into the correct format, and then that'll add it to XDR, and then you can take actions on that based on the integrations that are available.
Yeah, exactly that, yeah. And I think there's a lot of buzz going around to do with XDR. So just looking at some key statistics to kind of show how relevant it is at the moment. According to the IBM data breach report, it estimates that deploying XDR can reduce the time to detect by a month. So that's quite a big difference there.
Very much so, yeah. Because the thing is, you could have, and we've seen it with our own customers. We've seen someone creating a remote shell on a firewall and then using that as a jump point to then access stuff internally. And because that isn't protected by anything as such, and it could be a zero-day threat, it could be a POC that's been exploited in the wild, that then allows them to sit unnoticed on that network appliance and then go out and around and sniff about your network, do some discovery work, and obviously SentinelOne will pick up that, but you might have some endpoints aren't protected by SentinelOne, or another vendor that might not pick it up, and this is where the threat sort of is really.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think also another interesting statistic from that report was that 32% of organizations reported using 21 to 30 different security tools to respond to threats. So if you think about that, that's a lot of different things to manage, and where XDR is excelling, right, is bringing in all of the logs and information from those different tools, adding context to a detection so that you can have accurate alerts and be able to carry out your incident response through that, instead of utilizing lots of different tools that have different consoles and trying to line everything up.
Exactly. I mean, 100%. And the thing is, if you think about it, that's a lot of admin work for your team. You might be a small team, and that's obviously a lot of additional work and a lot of things you have to monitor and extra things you have to look out, and logging into different admin consoles and all this kind of stuff that adds to the overhead. SentinelOne, it's with their acquisition of Scalar a few years ago, they've now got that massive back-end data lake that they can store all of this rich telemetry in, and obviously the work that they're doing with their parsers and all this other stuff, and they're really focusing on it at the moment. They're putting a lot of R&D into it to make it the best XDR platform around, and this is obviously the next step from EDR.
So I suppose obviously SentinelOne is one of the main runners in the XDR space, but you also see there's so many vendors that are tagging onto the idea of XDR and focusing around that in terms of their marketing and things and all of that comes with it. Especially everyone has their different definitions of what XDR is. I've got here I've got the official definition from Gartner, which says it's a unified security incident detection and response platform that automatically collects and correlates data from multiple security components. So I think that's a fair definition.
That's a fair definition. Yeah. And the fact that it's coming from Gartner kind of indicates that this is what everyone should be striving to achieve with their XDR, because that's the sort of the de facto description of it. And I think SentinelOne are doing really well with that, because so we've mentioned integration, we've mentioned ingesting logs. What they, as part of the integration services they offer, things like Microsoft 365. So you can integrate with M365, so you can pick up all your SharePoint, Teams, Outlook, Exchange Online, all of the applications that are provided by M365. You can ingest those logs, and then you can actually take actions on those as well. You can integrate it with Azure AD, which is now Entra ID, Azure IDP. But what you can do is you can look for events like failed logons and things like that. And then if you've got complete license, you can actually set up star rules, so it'll automatically respond, and you can actually then move those risky users into a specific group in AD to reduce their permissions within your environment. And you can do that automatically. So it takes a lot of the overhead, the admin, the manual process out of this, and that's part of the point of XDR. It's all about automating it where possible, so it's as light touch as possible for your sort of SOC engineers or what have you.
Yeah. I kind of envision it in the same way, in the sense that it's providing you the deep context behind alerts, so getting rid of those false positives or weak signals, and instead providing you with more accurate alerts, which they can be automatically resolved. So minimizing the need for too many skilled resource or that kind of thing. It's kind of cutting back on that, giving time back to those people that would be managing that platform when it was EDR.
Exactly, and then that frees up, your sort of project guys to actually focus on your roadmap and what's next, and what's, how are you going to improve your posture, your security posture. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I think looking at what we've discussed around what XDR actually is, I think it brings in an important debate, which is what is the difference between XDR and a SIEM tool? Because at face value, some people might say they're doing very similar things. So would you need both, or either? What do you go for? So understanding what the key differences are between them can be very important for choosing what route your security strategy is going to go. So I think primarily the main difference that you're looking at is that a SIEM is taking logs and it's a centralized log management and analysis tool, whereas XDR is built more around that endpoint side of things. So providing the remediation through automation.
By looking at the correlation between the data that's ingested, and this is where the integrations come into play. They allow you to see that correlation and to act on it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think a SIEM tool requires, obviously, people to be able to manage that. And although it's giving you the details behind what's happening in your environment, you still need to do that manual remediation, whereas an XDR tool is doing that for you.
Yeah. SIEM tools historically have required a lot of admin, a lot of rules to be written so if an event happens, a particular event or a certain step of events, then it will create, you have to create a rule to monitor for that specific thing, and then it will create, then you can use SOAR then to actually action that a response there. So it's kind of like two tools together, isn't it, really, rather than a single tool. And the fact that generally any threats that come in, obviously, SentinelOne will automatically respond to that threat depending on how you have the policy set. And this it literally is extending that detection response. So I think it's still in its infancy in some respects. I know it's been sort of bandied around for a couple of years now, really, but I think it's still fairly new to the market, and I think the integrations are sort of the key differentiator, I suppose, between the two to some extent, because it's around someone else has written something to enable you to automate things, responses, whereas with SIEM you have to generally have a dedicated resource or /team in order to manage that whole bit of kit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it obviously then brings in the idea of a SIEM and a SOAR paired together. Does that equal XDR? But again, you still need to be able to manage those playbooks and response actions from a SOAR tool.
I mean, there are a lot that are written by vendors, so they do provide, and that is a form of integration, but it still, I believe, requires a lot more sort of manual steps to be done. With XDR and the integration platforms that they provide at the moment, you literally follow some instructions, set up an account somewhere that has the right permissions, and then I think you kind of forget about it, but you've done the hard part.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it's XDR kind of comes across as a tool that can be scaled from the smaller businesses right up to enterprise, because it doesn't come necessarily with that hefty price tag that a SIEM and a SOAR tool does, along with the resource and skills needed with that.
A large minimum buy price for SIEMs and SOAR, solutions. They sort of, it's got to be, how many users and above before we'll even speak to you.
Yeah, and a lot of them obviously are priced on data ingest, which can be quite tricky to manage.
And very expensive, depending on which vendor, because obviously they're charging per gig a day, whereas SentinelOne XDR Complete, it allows you to ingest up to 10 gigs per day, which when you think about it, for a smaller company is generally more than enough, depending on how busy their firewall logs are or whatever logs they're ingesting.
And with that, you're still retaining the core principle of it, right? So you've still got that endpoint detection and response in there. You're just getting that added context from all the other integrations. So you're getting more for your money in that sense.
I think so. Yeah. No, definitely. I think you're getting good value for money with SentinelOne and their XDR ingestion.
Definitely.
Daily limit.
Yeah, and I think obviously there are some crossovers between a SIEM, a SOAR, and an XDR platform, but obviously it all comes down to what your security strategy is, what your security maturity is, how much budget you have, and every business is different, right? So there's an argument that you could have all three and they could work together, because a SIEM and a SOAR provide other services within your security that XDR doesn't, but a smaller team might necessarily need all of that. So
yeah,
it just
and there are integration in the there's integration with SentinelOne with SIEMs as well. So you can actually send all your data from SentinelOne to a SIEM, and if you've got that in place already, you've obviously invested heavily in that technology. You can integrate the two, and then potentially phase the SIEM out over a period of time once XDR comes up to speed, and you've got everything that you want in that on that backend data lake.
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to what I was saying around the marketing side of things, there's some vendors almost marketing it like a mini SIEM. So maybe for those smaller companies, that is what its use case would be. It's just enabling everyone to have access to the same level of security, right?
Exactly that, yeah. And that's what's important. That's the key thing to take away from this is the fact that, SentinelOne is offering this as part of their complete license. So it's included in that cost already. So you don't have to make any additional purchases. You can purchase additional data. You can change your retention timescales as well, so you can add for additional retention data to that platform. But it's single product. It's there, single console, and you can take action from within that console as well. So yeah, really, I think it shows good value considering the amount of data you can ingest per day.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose obviously we've spoken around some specific use cases for XDR, but I think it'd be good if we perhaps talk through a example of how you would use XDR.
Okay, so I mentioned Entra ID or Zero AD. You can automatically, so if a threat is detected on an endpoint, you can automatically put that user into a risky group, and that reduces their permissions within the environment until you've resolved that threat. You can also, for example, you can also collect. If you've got a lot of on-prem kit rather than anything in the cloud as well, you can collect Windows event logs, and you can configure. I mentioned earlier star rules, so storyline automated response rules. So if you're monitoring your domain controllers, for example, and you keep getting a failed logon attempt and it's kicking in various times, you can set up a star rule to say, right, there's some sort of interesting activity going on this domain controller. You might want to investigate it, and you'll get an alert sent to your SOC team or to your IT support team, and then they can take that investigation. They've got all the information they need in the console because it's ingested, and you can then use that for troubleshooting or investigation for that alert.
Yeah, so it's just simplifying the process for you, so you can see exactly what's happening, how it's happening, and how you can remediate it.
Yeah, it's
easily.
all about correlation, really. It's all about how do I know where an attacker's their entry point is? If I don't have visibility of logs, there's no way I can see it unless I've got another team or another resource looking at the firewalls and trying to correlate. Oh, what time was it? 11:16. Okay, let's have a look over here. 11:16 in the logs. There's loads of stuff in here. How am I going to work out what it is? And then you're training IP addresses. You're kind of doing your normal troubleshooting. Whereas if you're ingesting into SentinelOne, you can then go into the XDR threat hunting. You can put in filters, and you can filter that data right down very quickly, and it's all there together, including firewall logs, endpoint logs, whatever other logs you're ingesting. It gives you that flexibility. So yes, it's impressive. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. And it all comes back around to, I feel like in every podcast I always talk about this, and everyone hears it everywhere. Obviously, visibility is key. Visibility and context are the key for security, and XDR is doing just that, right? So
exactly. Another integration that I've just thought of is with Zscaler, for example. So there's a lot of Zscaler customers around, use it for obviously their direct DIA internet access or reverse proxy for internal apps and stuff like that. And what you can do with Zscaler, again, because they've integrated with SentinelOne, they've been working together on this. You can again do an automatic action against that user, for example, and you can put them into another. Again, you have risky groups or groups within Zscaler that have restricted internet access. So it might just you can configure it probably to just literally stop their internet access. But being with SentinelOne, you can still access their endpoint via the console with a remote shell, so you can do some troubleshooting there and or remediate the threat, and then it will take them out and put them back into their normal groups and provide them German internet access again. So
yeah, it just ties everything together nicely, like you said. It's great, isn't it?
There's a lot of integrations. We'll have to put a data sheet up to show, potentially what integrations are available now. And as I mentioned earlier, they're working. They've invested a lot of time and money into these integrations.
Yeah, and that kind of segues nicely into what I was about to mention, which is what to look forward to in the future with XDR. So one of my main points there is more integrations, more one-click integration, so very minimal work needed on your side to actually get them set up. So that's obviously still expanding.
Exactly. So, we looked at Google Chronicle, for example, very early on. We were an early adopter of it, and we were looking at the integration there, and it was really, really difficult to integrate with anything when we first looked at it, because there wasn't a lot of information around, and it certainly wasn't. There weren't any one-click solutions. Obviously they've been working on it. It's improved no end. But with SentinelOne, as you say, it's all about the integration. It's all about the response actions that you can take against a threat, which will happen on another platform. So it's about as I say, so responding. A user gets a threat coming in, they download a dodgy file somewhere, let's go as an example. SentinelOne detects the threat, and then the action you can take, which you can automate, is to put that user into a risky group, and it reduces their chance of being able to get out and get anything, or for that threat to take any more action to get any further. So it kind of stops it there and then.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, so some of the other aspects I looked at for what to expect from XDR in the future would be around the AI-powered threat hunting for all of the logs that you're ingesting into XDR. You're starting to see it. I know SentinelOne has AI Purple, I believe it's called, and I think some of the other vendors are bringing in that element as well, just to really simplify how threat hunting can work, because a lot of people are like, I'm not a threat hunter, how am I going to make sense of all this information? Whereas, well, why not utilize AI? Everyone else is in every other tool.
Totally.
So yeah.
But no, absolutely, and it is coming, right? It's going to be there. It's going to be part of the platform, and it's the part of already our browsers. Bard or Copilot, whoever your GPT-4, whatever AI engine you're using. It's being integrated everywhere. Now Windows 11, for example, the Copilot down on Edge, that's AI based, and it makes sense to use it in threat hunting because, as you say, it is actually it's a skilled job. You generally have to have a lot of experience and kind of know a lot around threat actors and tactics, techniques, etc., to be able to start to identify. SentinelOne maps to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and that obviously is very useful and helpful. But you still need to have that sort of general understanding. Whereas if, for example, with AI SentinelOne Purple, what you can hopefully do is type in a question. Can you look for any threats on this endpoint, for example, and it will go off and it will do a query against the endpoint UUID and SentinelOne. You won't need to search for that. It will be able to correlate that with the endpoint name or the user that last logged into that endpoint. And this is where I see it kind of going. I could be totally wrong, but that's how I envisage it will be. It'll be simply asking, like you do now in ChatGPT. You ask it a question, and it will come back and it'll say, I found this endpoint. Is this the one you're on about? Yes, that's the one. Okay, what threats were on that endpoint over the last 30 days? And then you'll query it by questions rather than using the query language, which you don't have to understand, right? So anyone can ask questions. Anyone uses Google. It's fairly easy. So I think that's where it's going.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the main area I thought XDR would be going, other than the integrations and things like that. So I think another important one to note is the obviously SentinelOne and other vendors allow for managed services on top of that. So I think we'll very quickly see the market flooded with MXDR, so managed extended detection and response. That'll be it. That'll be out there. They're no longer changing the first letter. They're just adding more onto the front.
Now, so instead of a 3-letter acronym, it's a 4-letter one now.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense, though. To be fair, and and that's something that we will be offering as part of our service for the future. Because again, it's taking you have customers or you have clients companies that have very, very small IT teams because of, various reasons over the last couple of years since the pandemic. A lot of people were laid off, a lot of people are consolidating their licenses, they want to reduce their expenditure. And this it helps towards that. It's also things that businesses need to do and think about. So it's as you say, it's going that way for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's kind of everything I wanted to cover in this podcast. I think we've obviously gone through some of the main aspects of XDR. Obviously, it's still a very much evolving technology. Marketing's going to do its thing, as it always does, trying to spin it in different ways. So it's definitely something to look out for. But yeah, I think it's very interesting, and how it can enable those smaller businesses right up through to enterprise to be able to have the same level of security is
exactly
great.
Yeah, that's it, because you're bringing enterprise grade security to sort of small to medium businesses.
Yep.
And that can only be a good thing.
Yep, exactly. Great. Well, thank you very much, James, for joining me on this podcast, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you. And make sure you subscribe to make sure you don't miss a podcast, and we will join you on the next one. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.